All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. If you're a logistics pro, a supply chain manager, or really anyone managing a P&L right now, you already know margins are incredibly tight. But there's this silent, massive mechanism at work in the global shipping lanes right now that is completely rewriting the rules of the game. Today, we're unpacking the anatomy of a total cost stack. And specifically, we're looking at the absolute explosion of the War Risk Surcharge. It's basically a staggering new invisible tax that's about to obliterate current landed cost projections.
I mean, get a load of this number. $1.2 million. For a standard $100 million tanker transiting the Persian Gulf, this raw number represents the massive per-voyage war risk upcharge that just hit the market. And let's be clear, this isn't your standard P&I coverage, it's not a tariff, it's not some government tax. This is purely the added insurance premium for sailing into waters that have suddenly become a live conflict zone. And yeah, that $1.2 million, that is just for one single voyage.
So here's exactly how we're going to dissect this new P&L nightmare today. First, the unseen logistics tax. Second, the end of safe passage. Third, the total cost stack. And finally, the supply chain cascade.
Okay, moving into Section 1, the unseen logistics tax. Let's start with the catalyst here and look at the sheer financial scale of this initial premium spike. What's really wild here is the exponential leap in costs that happened literally almost overnight. Before the current crisis, war risk premiums on Gulf transits were, fairly manageable, running at about 0.2 to 0.4% of a vessel's hull value. That was standard, already baked into your logistics models. But immediately following the U.S. blockade announcement on April 13th, those premiums just skyrocketed to between 0.8 and 1.2%. That right there is exactly where we get that $1.2 million figure for a standard tanker. We're talking about an instant tripling or even quadrupling of a foundational shipping cost.
Right. Moving on to Section 2, the end of safe passage, because we need to look at why this isn't just a temporary blip, but a complete systemic paradigm shift in maritime risk.
This brilliantly and honestly kind of terrifyingly illustrates the rapid deterioration of maritime norms over just a matter of days. Look at April 19th, the Sanmar Herald incident. This was an Indian flag tanker. The IRGC actually granted this vessel clearance to transit, but then they fired on it anyway. It turns out official clearance paperwork makes a really terrible missile shield. So on the very day of that incident, 13 out of 14 vessels in the area simply turned back. They just completely refused to risk it.
Which leads to this harsh reality. There is no compliance-based safe passage anymore. The crucial point here is that because the IRGC granted clearance and fired anyway, underwriters are now forced to price for the absolute worst-case scenario. It used to be that if you complied with local authorities, got your clearance from Iran, you assumed you had safe transit. Well, the Sanmar Herald incident completely destroyed that assumption. Compliance simply no longer equals safety.
So, as you can see, operators naturally tried to adapt. They tried obscuring their identities using AS name changes, but it totally failed. Because of that, the market is now pricing in an additional 40 to 60% premium increase right on top of those massive post-blockade rates we just talked about. Plus, we're expecting Lloyd's Joint War Committee to extend the listed areas designation, which broadens the whole geographical penalty zone. And a quick note for those of you managing international fleets. If you're running Indian-flagged vessels, they are now facing extra country-specific premiums. It is just a sweeping, industry-wide crackdown on risk.
Okay, Section 3, the total cost stack. This is where things get really intense for logistics professionals, so you might want to take some notes.
Let's focus on the mechanics of this compounding problem, especially for incoming shipments to places like China. Notice how each specific layer of this new total cost stack triggers and ruthlessly compounds on the one directly below it. So you start with your base rate, simple enough. Then, vessels are avoiding the Red Sea, so boom, you take the hit on a Cape of Good Hope rerouting premium. On top of that longer journey, add the massive War Risk Surcharge we've been discussing. Now, because ships are thrown completely off schedule, you've got to add port congestion surcharges. Because they're idling and burning fuel, slap on a bunker fuel surcharge. And finally, cargo insurance premiums spike to cover the underlying goods. You see, this isn't simple addition. It is an escalating, compounding blow to your budget.
And adding massive friction to that exact stack is port congestion. Berth wait times are just ballooning wildly right now. Take Fujairah and Sohar, for example. Pre-crisis, a vessel might wait 12 to 18 hours to berth. That's perfectly manageable, right? But currently, those wait times have exploded to 4 to 6 days.
As logistics pros, you know time is quite literally money, and having a massive vessel sitting idle for almost a week absolutely decimates operational efficiency.
And what happens while they sit idle for those 6 days? Well, you get hit with emergency bunker fuel surcharges piling on because Singapore VLSFO, that's very low sulfur fuel oil, prices just doubled. So think about it. Your ships are taking longer routes, they are waiting days just to dock, and the fuel they are burning while doing all of this waiting is twice as expensive. The stack just keeps growing. And if you're in container shipping, carriers are aggressively passing the buck. We're seeing these exact emergency conflict surcharges hitting the books immediately. We're not just talking about bulk oil tankers here. If you're moving 40-foot containers, FEUs, on Gulf-linked routes, you're looking at a $3,000 emergency conflict surcharge right off the bat. Hapag-Lloyd specifically has already implemented a $1,500 War Risk Surcharge just for a single TEU. These are immediate, non-negotiable line items that are systematically destroying freight budgets.
Which brings us to Section 4, the supply chain cascade, because we really need to track the ripple effect of this stack to forecast the ultimate macroeconomic fallout.
The insurance increase on just one single tanker voyage inevitably cascades through every single link of the supply chain, all the way down to consumer packaging. Watch how this works. That initial $1 million war risk gets baked into the raw crude price. That elevated crude cost compresses refinery margins. So to compensate, refineries raise the wholesale price of diesel, jet fuel, and naphtha. Higher diesel hits truck deliveries. More expensive naphtha raises the cost of plastics. Ultimately, every single penny of that maritime friction lands directly on the grocery store shelves.
Now you might be wondering, hey, if this is happening right now, why hasn't inflation spiked at the consumer level yet? Well, the only reason everyday consumers haven't felt this yet is because of a 60 to 90-day delay provided by existing buffer stock. Supply chains have this built-in shock absorber, inventory that was shipped and priced under the old, cheaper rates. But that buffer is basically a ticking clock.
Ultimately, insurance acts as the invisible infrastructure of global trade. When it reprices, absolutely everything else reprices too. It's the tax nobody voted for, nobody sees, and everybody pays. When those 60 to 90 days are up and inventories are forced to replenish at the new heavily surcharged landed costs, that inflation is going to be broad, systemic, and totally unavoidable.
So I want to leave you with this critical question. What happens to your margins when that 60 to 90-day buffer stock runs out? If you haven't adjusted your pricing models to account for this total cost stack, honestly, you have very little time left to do so. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments how your operations are adapting to these surcharges. And make sure you subscribe because in our next explainer, we're going to dive deep into why the real story of this crisis might not actually be crude oil at all, but rather the plastics and chemicals markets. It's a fascinating cascade, and I will see you there.